Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Sainato with Real Progressives. I have a special Friday evening show, and we have two very special guests that I'm very excited about, having on the show this evening. We have the DNC lawsuit attorney Jared Beck, and we have Benjamin Dixon from Progressive Army. I'm sure those of you watching know these two progressive superstars. So I want to thank Jared and Ben for taking the time out of their Friday evenings for coming on the show. We really appreciate it here at Real Progressives.
Oh, my
thanks for having us. Really appreciate being on the show, Mike. Thanks for organizing this.
Well, Jared, I still see you, and I still hear you, Jared.
You still see me, Ben?
Yeah,
Mike, are you okay? Uh-oh. Mike, did you freeze? Do we have to log it back into this? Okay.
Yeah, let's give him a second or two to come back.
Okay. Oh, now I see you, and Mike disappeared.
Yeah. So it's just the two of us. So I guess we're hosting the show until he gets back.
All right. Well, Ben, this is your bailiwick. So if you want to kick things off, you got a nice drink there. I was telling Ben before the show that given recent events, I could really use what he's drinking, and he's sending me the recipe after this. So I'm looking forward to that.
Definitely. So we're going to filibuster until Mike gets back. I hope he doesn't mind. I'm sure he won't mind. But here he is. He's trying to come in now.
Excellent.
Well, so let's do this. Just because, like you said, this is my wheelhouse. He mentioned that he wanted to start with you just giving kind of a snapshot of where you are with the DNC lawsuit. So I figured that's just a good way of start until he gets back.
Yeah, let me give everybody the nutshell summary of the case. We filed the DNC fraud class action lawsuit in June of 2016. Oh, there's Mike. How you doing, Mike? We lost you there for a second.
Yeah. Technical difficulties.
Yeah, Ben kicked things off in your absence, and I'm just going to run down a very brief thumbnail sketch of the lawsuit for those who are listening who may not be familiar of it. We filed the case in June of 2016 based on the Guccifer 2.0 documents, which were released into the public domain that confirmed the results of what we had been investigating since Nico House came to our office in Miami. And that goes to, of course, what we believe to be overwhelming evidence that the DNC fixed the primaries for Hillary Clinton and against Bernie Sanders. This case has been pending in the Southern District of Florida, Fort Lauderdale Division, since June of 2016. We are currently on the second motion to dismiss filed by the DNC and its former chairperson, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz. The hearing was held on April 25th. We released the transcript of that hearing, which lasted some 3.5 hours, into the public domain. And while there's largely been a mainstream media blackout of the case, some of it has leaked into the mainstream media by now, by which I mean news of the case. People are looking at the transcript, especially in the alt media. The progressive media has been, I think, very concerned with the arguments that were made by the DNC at the hearing. And, I think this is, maybe a great point of discussion, or a departure point of discussion where we can maybe talk about those arguments, because I'm interested to hear the questions and thoughts that you guys might want me to answer or might want put out there for discussion. But I think that there is, and I'll just turn it over after I say this, but I think there's both legal significance and political significance to what the DNC has argued in that hearing. And that's why it's garnered a lot of attention, if not in the mainstream media, which is doing everything it can to not talk about the case, at least in my opinion.
Well, Ben, could you share us just a little bit about your thoughts on the lawsuit, and do you have any other advice or any other ways you think Bernie Sanders supporters should be, redressing their grievances from the primaries in productive ways, like this lawsuit?
Yeah. So in general, I think the lawsuit is important, and I've said as much several times. I think the lawsuit is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, there is a propensity in the DNC and the establishment to dismiss anyone who said that the primaries were rigged. And this is forcing the DNC on the official court record to really concede that, yeah, it was rigged. And I think this is important because when we try to communicate where the problem was, we can't really communicate the problem where the problem actually is. When you have a DNC chair now who admitted by accident that it was rigged and then turn around and recant it because he wanted to win, Tom Perez. And so now we're forcing them into the corner, or Jared and his team, they're forcing them into the corner to admit what really happened during the primaries. And if we can actually get that on the books, then there's no more debate about it. We know what happened, and we know that's why we are here where we are now. So as far as advice, I really wouldn't offer any advice as of yet. I want to see where the conversation goes and then offer some at that point.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Ben. Jared, I know with this lawsuit, there's been little coverage there has been in the mainstream media. It's been rather dismissive. I know Dave Weigel at the Washington Post called it largely frivolous. Can you talk a little bit about why that's false? And if you just talk about why there's what the legal is for this lawsuit, why it's valid.
Let me answer that first by building on something Ben said, because I think what Ben just said in terms of the significance of this lawsuit cannot be stressed enough. Insofar as before you even start to dig into the legal arguments and whether or not the DNC has a valid argument to dismiss the case and what the next steps are, I think you really have to focus on what Ben just said, which is that this, I think, is the only forum where there's a serious discussion going on about what happened in the primaries.
For sure.
It's very hard to have that discussion just in the media because, as we know, there's really no accountability in the media anymore, even if the media is willing to talk about it, and even if the players themselves are willing to talk about it. I mean, for example, you have Tom Perez going on the record in February, I believe, stating that the primaries were rigged and then walking that statement back 1 or 2 days later. And so when somebody says, I agree with you that the primary was rigged, and then 2 days later they say, actually, that I didn't mean to say that. Well, it's really hard to have a discussion about the issue when there's no forum structuring the discussion. And one of the things about law and litigation specifically is that the discussion is very, very structured. So in this case, we have a complaint that we filed based on documents that were in the public domain. And then the first step that's going on right now, and this gets to your question, Mike, about where we are in the lawsuit and what the arguments are. The first step is what's called a motion to dismiss, in which the DNC challenges our right to get legal relief based on what the allegations are. And so the discussion is very structured. We have a very structured process, and then the judge is going to be the arbiter of what arguments are good and what arguments are not so good. And so when you have that judge structuring the process, you actually can get somewhere, I believe, in terms of having a positive discourse. So I think Ben just really nailed it right on the head as to why I think, above everything else, people should pay attention, because this is the only discussion going on about right now that is formal and structured and civil and bound by rules of argument and evidence that you're going to find on these issues.
I do have one piece of advice now that you've said that, Jared. I would advise everyone to go and actually read the proceedings. Well, first of all, it's great reading. It's 123 pages, and it blows by really quickly because it's really engaging. And to see the back and forth, I never really knew that court reporters recorded everything, everything down to the ums. But just to read it and to see the arguments from both sides, it's hard to read that and feel as though this is not something that should be happening, regardless of where you are on whether or not you feel like they have a case or they don't have a case, which side you fall on. This is a conversation that should be having, and it should be happening in the format that is currently happening. So that's my advice. If you have not read those 123 pages, I think I read it in like 2 hours. So I would advise everyone to go do that.
Thanks for making that point, Ben, because we get asked all the time, how can we help with the lawsuit? People want to send us money, for example. Well, we're not taking donations for the lawsuit. We're paying for the costs out of our own pocket, which is what we do with all of our contingency cases. So don't send us money. And I think really the best thing you can do is actually do just what Ben said, which is go to the website and read for yourself what the lawyers are saying, what the judge is saying, when the orders come out, what the orders say, and use your own powers of reason and analysis to dig in the issues and decide if, number one, you agree with what the DNC is saying in a legal sense. We cite our case law, they cite their case law. A lot of people think that law is something that happens in like a magic box, and there's something. It's actually fairly straightforward. I mean, you don't need a law degree to actually read and understand legal arguments and assess whether they're good or not. And so I'm so happy you said that, Ben, because that makes me so happy when I see people, sending the transcript around, highlighting parts of it, having that discussion. I think that, if people learn more about the legal process and how it works through this case, because so many people in the class, I assume many of them, if not the vast majority, have never actually had a lawyer in a lawsuit before. And they've never actually been through the process. Maybe they've had a parking ticket, maybe they've had something minor, but not a major piece of litigation with the kinds of things that are going on with the major motions that you're seeing filed. And, this is how our legal system works. And in order for it to work well, we have to participate, and we have to be informed about it. And it's not my case. I'm the lawyer on the case. This is the case. The case is being brought on behalf of everybody who's in the proposed classes. Contribute, treat it like your case. Read the documents. Ask us questions. I try to respond to people on Twitter because I can't have this is a weird case in a lot of ways. Like I can't have like an attorney-client conversation with my clients because there's so many of them. So a lot of times I pick out questions that I think maybe people are having, concerns like, what about this? What about this? I'm not afraid to say that. I mean, I'm never going to give litigation strategy on Twitter. I'm never going to give anything confidential on Twitter, but I will respond to people's concerns like I would for my clients in any case, because litigation can be a very, very tough process. It can be very, very psychologically hard. I know that for people that, saw what was happening in the primaries on the ground and were part of that, it's really hard every time the DNC gets up and denies that happened, because it's like psychologically they're telling you something happened when you know it to be true. And I know, how hard that can be psychologically. And sometimes you just want to, you're just so frustrated, and that's why, part of the lawyer's job, in addition to our job in court, preparing the papers and arguing, we also have to, manage our clients and make sure they understand the process. And it's a real challenge. So, follow me on social media. I can be, I can be short-tempered on Twitter. I can use profanity. Ben, I know you've been the target of that rather unfairly. And I kind of let it all hang out on Twitter. But I really truly believe in, the public aspect of this, as Ben pointed out. And I feel like we have to be so transparent with everything because there is so little trust in our government right now. And this may be one of the few areas that's going on right now where people, are trying to have trust in a process. And above all, no matter how it turns out, my hope is that at the end of this, we can have trust in our legal system to get justice.
Mike, I'm sorry, I was going to say something, but go ahead, Mike.
Well, I mean, you can say something, because I just wanted to ask you about, what are your thoughts on just not only the media coverage, but in general, as media, people, how do we balance, covering this, addressing some of the past issues in the primary, when we're facing, an establishment mainstream media that's been working very aggressively to, whether it's to rehabilitate Hillary Clinton or rehabilitate the establishment, or really double down on the same strategies that the Democratic Party has, used, and that's really failed them time and time again.
Yeah. So to that point, man, I think it's clear. I think it's clear that the Democratic Party hasn't learned nothing, if I can say it that way. They've learned nothing, and they don't want to learn anything. And this is one of the reasons why, win or lose, I think this case is important. I think this is important because we need documented ammunition that we could use as progressives to push back against the DNC and the establishment that's trying to really just keep going like they didn't lose to the most ridiculous Orange Julius we've ever seen in our lifetime. Like they're trying to act like they did everything right. In actuality, they didn't. And so I think if there is a media blackout, I think to any extent it's involved with the fact that they don't want to have this conversation on national television. But this lawsuit should force them to do that. But to that end, I feel as though, Jared, you mentioned like your demeanor on Twitter and everything else. I feel it. Let me start here. Before I read the proceedings, I was like, man, I'm gonna get on this thing Friday night, and I'm just gonna watch Jared. I'm just gonna come after him because he came after me for no reason in the world. I'm gonna come after Jared. Then I read the proceedings, and I'm like, this is an important lawsuit. I already knew it was important, but I doubled down on the reason I think it's important because it's beautiful to see it in writing. It's beautiful to see the attorneys admit to certain things that the media still isn't admitting to. And now we as media heads, myself included, I have ammunition to say, no, it's in court proceedings. It's right here. The DNC did X, Y, and Z. But in terms of media coverage, I would just say this as a friend to Jared, even though, we got off, I think the first exchange we ever had on Twitter
got off on the wrong foot,
man. But as let's just say as a progressive friend, I would say that you would help the cause more if you came at other media personalities, whatever the hell you want to call us. I don't know what I'm a blogger as far as I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. But just, don't attack us because you feel like we're not covering it. Invite us to cover it. Right? Okay. Invite us to do it. Democracy Now! Is one of the most well-respected not establishment, but established independent media outlets. And I think that they would be more than happy to cover this. But when you come at them the way that you did, like you came at me and you came at Glenn Greenwald and a couple other people, it's kind of like it makes us take a step back and say, hold on, it makes us put up our guards and do what we did. This whole week's been kind of crazy. Mm-hmm. And I would say you can invite more attention to the process simply by having people read this, email it to them because it's an important proceedings, and I don't know how it's going to play out. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say where it's going to end, but I definitely appreciate the fact that it's happening.
Well, thank you for that, Ben, and I really appreciate that. Let me just say a couple things because I'm open to all advice from all corners. This is the ultimate group project in a lot of ways. Okay. I mean, we're not going to, this case is not going to win or lose based on one person, okay, or two people. This is, and that's true of litigation in general. So, I love to hear what you're saying about that. I think the media exposure that we've gotten is phenomenal so far, and I say that because of the two people I'm looking at right now and others on my screen. And I mean you, Ben, and you, Mike. You have been models of journalism, not just on this lawsuit, but in general on progressive issues, pushing back against the mainstream in ways I don't even think you guys fully appreciate at this point in time. But I think when the history books are written, things will become clearer as to just how important the role of independent media, not just on the progressive side, but I take a very expansive view of media these days. I talk to people on the alt-right who are considered alt-right, besides the alt-left. I talk to mainstream. I guess what you're seeing on Twitter is what I call my stopping way of trying to get people to notice this case in different ways. And sometimes I do come across as very caustic, but I feel that at the end of the day, people shouldn't cover this lawsuit because I'm the lawyer on it. We have co-counsel who are very talented, who can speak to these issues, as well, if not better than I can. And at the end of the day, we are going to get an order on this pending motion based on what you saw in the transcript there, Ben. And that's going to be the judge talking. It's not going to be me talking. Mm-hmm. At that point, we'll see what the media does. I think to me, it's still an open question what the media does at that point. You guys are in the media, so you may have more of a sense at what's going to happen. I'm just kind of got my head down, and then things happen, and I respond to them. But you guys are more, you guys are way more experienced with the workings of media than I am. But it seems to me that the mainstream media is not going to be able to ignore this when an order comes out. But I could be wrong on that.
I was going to say, man, the best way to get coverage for this is for this motion to whichever way it goes. But if you win this motion and you continue, there's automatic media coverage. I mean, the mainstream will not be able to ignore that, and I think that's going to be the most powerful tool. So no amount of trying to drum up support on Twitter will replace you winning this motion that you guys. It's already a motion, right? The die has already been cast. So when
Ben,
this hits,
you just convinced me, man. No more. I'm not going to troll. I'm not going to troll media on Twitter anymore. I think you just convinced me. We're gonna. You know what? You're right. We're gonna get the order, and the judge is gonna say what he's gonna say, and and you're right. No amount of Look, I mean, I think frankly, you ignore this case as at your peril if you're a journalist. But I'm not a journalist. I don't see the world through a journalist's eyes. So,
if I could give you what I see through a journalist's eye, I would say I would repeat exactly what you just said. I'm not convinced that the judge won't allow this to go forward. I honestly, from reading what I read, and just as a layman, but a pretty good thinker of a layman, this actually might make it past this motion. I think it may go forward. And anyone who's ignored it, they really have ignored it to their peril, right? So I'll get dibs, right? So as soon as the motion comes back in your favor and it goes forward, I want a full interview with you before anybody else. And
you're on the list. You're on the list, Ben. I don't know.
No, I don't want to be on the list. I want to be first. I want to be first.
But I don't know where I'm going to be. I don't know where I'm going to be, and I don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, we literally have no idea. That's the other thing that is, I think people, don't realize this about litigation. But I'm not, hiding anything when I tell you that I have literally no idea when this order is going to come down. I mean, it could come down like literally as we're talking here right now. I would have no foreknowledge of that, and it could be 6 months from now. Okay, I can't give you a range. I mean, I can refer everyone to the transcript at the end where the judge said that candidly it's going to take some time to work on the issues. But, what that means, that's, only the shadow knows at this point.
Yeah, I would definitely agree to that. Mike, I don't know which way you wanted to go, but if you wanted to dig into some of the nuts and bolts of the lawsuit, or wherever you want to go, we're following your lead.
I mean, by all means, we can talk a little bit about, we can speculate about what that order might entail. So I guess what I want to explore a little bit is, I hope it doesn't happen, but based on if Judge Locke decides to grant the motion to dismiss, what's the best way to handle that, both in the media and going forward in trying to address the issues this lawsuit is trying to address.
So that's a very good question, and it's also a very complex question because the way the DNC and Debbie Wasserman Schultz brought their motion to dismiss is that they put many issues, in front of the judge, some of which we believe are premature. So the exact contours of the order, it's hard. It's very hard to say. Speak of it in terms of winning or losing. The big issue for us that we need to win on. Let me just put it this way: the big issue that we need to win on is standing. In other words, we need to have convinced the court that we have a right to sue the DNC and Wasserman Schultz for fraudulent conduct based on the injuries that we've alleged in the complaint. That's there are a whole bunch of, and the reason that transcript went on so long is partly because they put so many other issues in there. And if people are interested in exploring a lot of the the parallel or the collateral issues to the one I just talked about, standing, it's really the best thing to do is go into the transcript. There's actually a lot of fascinating little twists and turns in there that the judge could rule on. But the main issue, and the one that the media coverage thus far has talked about, is standing. And standing is a very, very fundamental question. And, I think that I just don't see their argument, and I'm not saying that because I want to win. I'm saying that because sometimes you can see an argument that's like 50-50. You have a good case, they have a good case, and it's up to the judge to read these two cases that are kind of on point but come to different conclusions and to determine which is the right legal principle to apply. But this is not a situation like that because they haven't cited, in my view, a single case that helps them on the standing issue and rebuts a lot of cases that we cited on the standing issue. So, it's just hard for me to see how we're going to lose on that issue. That said, I'm prepared for that order to say anything.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's something I want to ask you, Jared, if you can help me, because when I was reading this, I actually highlighted this section, and this is you speaking to the court. You're saying you're not asking the court to infringe on the province of another branch of this government or to get involved in the conduct of Congress, et cetera, et cetera. You said, we're asking this court to determine whether the representations and omissions were false and misleading, and this line right here, and whether money was paid on the basis of those representations.
Right.
Here's where I see a potential problem. If the dealing with fraud and it's you're dealing it on whether or not the money that everyone gave was based on the representation of them being fair and balanced, for lack of a better phrase, right now. Mm-hmm. what do you do with the fact that pretty much everyone going into this campaign knew that they were dealing with a corrupt DNC? That everyone going in knew that we were fighting against a corrupt institution, and Bernie was our best hope to combat that. So in a way, it's like when we gave money to Bernie, we gave money to Bernie saying that we need him to fight this corrupt institution, and we really had no expectations of them being judicious, but rather being corrupt.
I'm glad you asked that question, Ben. You ask very, very pointed questions, and you get to a lot of issues that I think are at the heart of the matter. So this is actually an argument that goes to another issue, not the standing issue, which is the primary issue. This goes to the issue of reliance, which is when you're talking about fraud, how do you prove reliance? So it's not just enough that you have a false statement to have a fraud claim. You've also have to have other elements. And I think what I hear you saying is you're asking, how do you prove reliance when the concept of corruption was in the air, so to speak, during the campaign? Is that more or less your question, Ben?
Yeah, because for a person like me, and maybe it's because I've been doing this for a while and I'm jaded as hell. But most of my coverage was exactly this. No surprise about Guccifer 2.0, because we knew this is the exact corrupt institution that we've been fighting against. And I've got so many videos to that effect. And I'm wondering if that could kind of undermine the fraud claim.
I think you have to look at, when you're looking at these issues in the context the court will be looking at them, which is, we're not at the trial stage right now. We're at the motion to dismiss stage. And if we get past the motion to dismiss stage, we'll get to the motion for class certification stage, in which we'll ask the court to certify a class. And this issue may or may not come up at that stage as well. Number one thing is, I think you have to look at things from the perspective of the average person, not a pundit, for lack of a better term, as yourself, or a lawyer activist like me. Number one, you have to look at the average person that's giving money to the Bernie Sanders campaign. Now, they may be aware of corruption in a general sense, but the details of the corruption are very specific in this case. We're not just saying, okay, Hillary Clinton is corrupt. Everybody associated with her campaign was corrupt. They were doing what they could to undermine Bernie. That's not the claim. The claim is specifically what the DNC did. And so the analogy there is like, if two teams are playing in the Super Bowl, I think, the ordinary fan is going to assume, I believe, could be wrong about this, but I believe they're going to assume that the NFL is not picking sides. But again, the questions that you asked, my hope is that we get a trial on these issues and we get to the truth of what people really believed about the political process and what actually happened. Right now we're just pleading a claim for fraud. We're not even at that stage where, for example, you're suggesting, a situation, and I think you're thinking, in terms of, what a defense lawyer might do confronted with, and that's the way, by the way, everyone should read this stuff. That's how you read critically. Okay, you think of the opposing arguments. Okay, you got to think of their best arguments. Okay, because that's what the judge is thinking, and that's going to give you the most insight. And so I think you're thinking of a situation. Sure, there could be I could see that argument being made in the context of trial. But at this point, we're still a long way from that stage. If that makes sense. Yeah.
No, it makes total sense, because I don't feel like I didn't see anything that jumped out to me in that motion. And again, I'm not an attorney, clearly, but I felt like you made a convincing case why there should be a trial. And the reason I say that is because of some of the key questions the court was asking, right? The court was asking questions of the defense attorney that made me say, okay, the judge sees something here that's worth exploring. So I think I'm fully of the opinion, and I mean, you already know it could go either way, but, just a lay person reading it, I don't see why it wouldn't go forward. But I think one of the first things, based on what I read, that they would throw at us, it would be, could they take Twitter, for example? Could they take a sample of your class from Twitter and look at the communications that they had prior to the primaries ending and see the communication where, the majority of us knew and communicated that fact that the DNC was corrupt? Could something like that be entered into evidence? And again, I'm with you. We're not talking about this motion stage. We're talking about an actual trial stage.
That's a good question. It's hard to say at this point. I mean, given the way the allegations are, and we're not just talking about false representations that were made, but also omissions. So here's something just to consider. I'm just throwing this out there. Okay, I just thought of this now. But is there a material difference between suspecting that something may be wrong with a process and actually knowing on the basis of hard evidence? And would that make a difference in terms of whether you're going to go cut a check for Bernie Sanders?
Right. What about the and again, you're right. I did think I'm sitting here thinking, what are they going to come at you with? What about this this expectation or the reality that people invest in campaigns with fully knowing there's a possibility that they're going to lose? So in the sense of damages being awarded, if someone invested $1 million in or collectively invested $1 million into Jill Stein, well, most people who invested in Jill Stein knew it was a good possibility that they would lose. How would that play into this decision?
Hey,
in the trial rather.
That's another really good question. This is the way I think about it. What is it exactly when somebody gives money to a political candidate? What are they doing these days? That's the question. What are you really doing? And this is my view of it. And again, this is my view. This may or may not come up as an issue in this case, but I think it's something we can think about. The Supreme Court issued a case that I think a lot of people are very familiar with called Citizens United. What did Citizens United say? It said, open the floodgates to money in politics. That's what most people think of it as, unlimited super PAC money. Right?
Yeah.
But then number two is, as Ben, you just said, it equated money to speech, and a part that doesn't get stressed too much, money to political participation. In other words, it told us in that opinion that giving money to a political campaign is equivalent to participating in our political process, right? Because you give your money to the campaign, and then the campaign goes out, they use that money to spend it on campaign speech. And that's how our democratic process runs. So if you, as a citizen, really want to participate in our democracy, you can vote, but guess what? You can do a lot more if you give money, right? Isn't that our system? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, voting, is not really, the political participation that makes a difference. That's why we're here where we are today. That's my belief. Okay, it's the other form of political participation, money, that is, what Citizens United is putting its finger on. Now, why do I say that in response to your question, Ben? Because the question I asked is, what are people really doing if they are spending money and giving it to a political candidate? You use the term investing. I don't like the term investing because I don't think it's accurate. When you invest, you're expecting a return, right? You're expecting, maybe like, okay, the stock market could go up 8% this year, so I'll put it in an index fund and hope for my 8%. Or maybe Apple's a really good company. I've done my research. They'll go up 30% this year. You expect a return. And then if someone lies to you, okay, you've you've got a securities fraud case. Now you go to the political realm. You're never going to get a percentage return on your money, no matter who you give it to, in a democratic system, right?
Depending on if you're a big corporation or not, but yeah, as an average
right.
person.
Yeah. But we're not representing big corporations. Yeah. We're representing penny donors. These are guys and women and all over the country, including people that gave. We have homeless people in our class. They weren't given the money that they could put together because they were expecting a return in an investment sense. They're participating in the process because they understand the way. I believe that people understand maybe more than a lot of other people give them credit for, and I believe that So when I get contacted by homeless people or unemployed people on disability who are literally they gave the last bit of money they could find to Bernie Sanders, okay? They were participating in a political process, and I think we can prove that they wouldn't have done that if they thought the whole thing was rigged and wasn't bona fide political process. But this is going to be, I don't know how that issue is going to come up, but I'm glad you asked the question because I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, I think that would be, and this is, again, for everyone who's listening, and Jared, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is at the trial phase, right?
Exactly.
We're discussing, right? This is not necessarily what the judge is deciding right now in this.
No. None of these issues are before the court. This is all, ultimately, if we get our, what we want, we're going to end up in a trial just like any other trial, and it's going to be, 6 folks from the jury pool in Broward County that are going to be asked to decide this. Okay?
So it's a jury decision here.
Yes. You've ever seen on TV in the murder context, it's the same process in the civil context. It's an actual jury, and they're going to hear arguments. They may hear arguments that we are discussing and going over tonight. They may hear different arguments depending on how the case goes, and that, again, that's why I think, ultimately, as a lawyer, gosh, I can't tell you the number of times, I've woken up recently and felt such dismay at our government. But then when I think about our jury system, and the fact that we still have it, it makes me very happy, because what could be a more democratic system than having, 6 people from the jury pool decide this case, right?
Back to if you could, because these are just things like I made some notes. I took screenshots of the proceedings earlier this week, and I think this might be a good place to ask this question. I believe these are your words. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you said, so I think personally, in regards to standing, in spite of the defendant's efforts to muddy the waters and try to paint this into a political brush, like, fighting some political battle, which is just totally not true. I think in standing, it's an easy question. We may represent people that gave to Bernie Sanders, but that doesn't mean that this lawsuit has any connection whatsoever to political campaign that Bernie Sanders fought. It's about damages. And doesn't that go back to what you're just saying, though, the question of whether or not what someone is doing with their money, would that connect at all with the fact that people were making either a political statement with their money versus something that they can seek damages over? Could you help me parse that right there? Yeah,
that's a good question, because the DNC has tried to craft an argument that just because you're spending money on a political campaign and you're not, for example, going to the store and buying a product, buying a share of stock on the stock market, you're not getting something tangible back that we don't have standing. That's one of their primary arguments. Well, we're very, very fortunate on this issue, and I'll tell you why. In 2003, the Supreme Court issued a decision, and I believe it was a unanimous decision, okay, which, getting the Supreme Court to agree unanimously on something these days is a big, big deal, okay? We have a very divided Supreme Court, okay, as I think a lot of us know. And in this case, which is called Illinois versus Madigan, and you can, look at this on the internet, it's available, and read the decision. It's out there, free of charge. And we cited it in our briefs, and I talked about it at the hearing. This was a case involving a group of Illinois charities, okay? And they made the argument that they could not be liable for fraud, okay? Because when a person gives money to a charity, they're actually not buying anything. They're, as you put it, they're, making a statement with their money, or they're, doing an act of goodwill for with their money, but they're not expecting anything in return. So how could they be damaged? And
Right.
The Supreme Court rejected that argument very, very decisively and allowed the state of Illinois to go after these charities for civil fraud. And, I think we have a very, very analogous situation to this case. And you'll actually see at the point in the transcript where the judge asks a question about charitable donation, people giving charitable donations and whether they have standing. And I can tell you I'm 99% sure he asked that case because he was referring to the Madigan opinion. And I know that because we cited that in our briefs. So I am confident on that issue.
Would you, in that regard, though, because I remember that section. Listen, the reason I remember so much is because I was fascinated. Reading it is literally like reading David versus Goliath almost. You really see you putting up the case of the people. I really enjoyed the narrative of it. You guys, the attorneys, you speak so precisely and you communicate a narrative in a way that really captivated me. So this is, if people are wondering why am I paying so much attention to the brief, because it was a good ass read. Go read the brief. It's great.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
But to that end, I remember the section on when he asked a question about charities. Aren't charities uniquely different, though? Aren't charities along the lines of they are here to do something specific? And parties, not Democratic, but just parties in general, they're here to carry out campaigns with no guarantee of winning. Would they? What are the chances that they would look at charities being uniquely different than?
Oh, did we lose Ben?
No, I'm here.
Okay. Oh, there you go. You froze up there for a second.
What's the last part you heard?
I heard you say, how do you, would a court look at a political party the same way as a charity, given, and then you trickled off a little bit.
Yeah. So seeing that a charity is there to do a specific task, and a party is there to try to win with no guarantee of winning. Would the court look at that at two different entities?
I think in this case, the court would find it actually has something in our case that they didn't have in the Madigan case, which is an actual charter which lays out the DNC's role. And so that's why the charter, is a very important document in this case, because it actually puts in black and white what the purpose of the corporation is. In this case, DNC Services Corporation, which is the DNC. And that charter is very, very specific about how the DNC is supposed to be running its elections. So, to me, I would be, I would just be very, very surprised that a court would not hold a corporation to its charter. I don't think I've ever seen a case where a court didn't hold a corporation to its charter. So, when you compare this case to Madigan, I think it would be a really, really uphill battle for the DNC to argue that its purpose is contrary to the mission of its charter. That would be a very, very difficult thing to pull off in court successfully.
Cool. Mike?
Well, Jared, I just had a question about, I don't know if everyone knows this, but the lawsuit was in October 2016. The judge said we're going to deliberate and I'll issue a ruling on the motion later. And then we had this hearing in April. So how does this hearing and the arguments that were cited back and forth by you and the DNC lawyers, how does that hearing differ from all the other hearings we heard in October and September and August? And I know one of them, the DNC lawyers, actually looked up Bernie supporters' Facebooks who were cited as members and said, "Oh, so and so said that Debbie was cheating, so this lawsuit is bullshit because of that."
Right.
So can you give us a little bit of an explanation on background on that?
Yeah, you're referring to a portion of their motion where they went into the social media of some of the plaintiffs and pulled up some things and quoted some things out of context and drew inferences from other things. My response to that in court was that that's procedurally improper on a motion to dismiss because there's a very, very important rule that we lawyers call the four corners rule. And basically that means that when you're on a motion to dismiss the complaint, the court, barring very unusual circumstances, is required to look at the four corners of the document and can't look at anything outside of the document in making its ruling. So, I personally think that the judge is not going to pay much attention to that stuff at this stage. Doesn't mean, we might not be talking about issues like that at some point in the case, but, we're really more focused on standing and whether we state a cause of action at this point. And, those are the issues we discussed. I mean, we've only had 2 hearings in this case so far because the defendants have filed 2 separate motions to dismiss. The first was for a motion to dismiss for insufficient service of process. The second was is the one we're dealing with now, which is a motion dismissed for lack of subject matter jurisdiction and failure to state a cause of action. And they also have an issue with some of our class action allegations.
Right. And so this past hearing, is that normal for the judge to hear arguments back and forth? Because when I saw the news of the hearing, I was expecting him to just kind of explain his ruling already. I wasn't anticipating that he was going to hear more arguments.
The hearings come in, all different flavors and cases. Some judges never like to hear argument. I've had cases in federal court where I've gone all the way through summary judgment right before trial and never had a single hearing. I've also had cases where judges have hearings very, very frequently, even on, minor issues like, whether a party wants an extension or not. Sometimes judges rule directly from the bench. They may have their orders already prepared. The Supreme Court, they hear oral arguments on some days. Other days they read their orders into the record. In this case, I've been told that, for this particular judge, that this is a rather substantial amount of time to spend on a motion to dismiss hearing, which, seems reasonable to me. He was very, very clear at multiple points during the hearing that he was extending as much time as possible for us to make our arguments. He was very, very clear that he wanted both sides to take as much time with their arguments as they felt necessary. Usually, judges don't allow the parties so much latitude to argue their position at length. They may have more specific questions and then give you a few minutes to give an open or closing. So that is I'll just end by saying this on that question. I mean, that's the largest hearing on a motion to dismiss that I've ever, seen in my practice thus far of over 10 years. So, it's a very, very substantial hearing, and I think it reflects the seriousness with which Judge Slock is taking the issues.
Mike, can I ask, Jared, if you don't mind, I want to ask you one other question. I was scrolling through my phone because I read it on my phone and I have the screenshots here. The section where the judge, or not the judge, but the defense attorney was talking about the definition of a Democratic Party, and then they got into how the court generally doesn't get into the inner party.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They use the example of like the definition of a Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
First, what does it mean to be a Democrat? Everybody should know what it means to be a Democrat.
Yeah.
Identifies whether or not they're Democrats or not. But then when he used the example of what it means to be a Baptist, it actually resonated with me because, well, we Baptists are having that argument still, 300 years later, because everyone has a different interpretation of what it is to be a Baptist. Wouldn't that put the judge in the position of having to dictate what it actually means officially to be a Democrat, not from a self-identification doctrine perspective, rather?
Yeah, that's another really good question, Ben. This gets into an issue that, to my knowledge, has received very, very little attention anywhere in the media, although I do think I talked about it just a little bit with Tim Black when I was on his show. I think we talked about this a little bit, but I mean, there's been very little attention to this issue. And, I think you hit something very interesting and strange on the head, which is that the Democratic National Committee is essentially taking the position that there is no definition of Democrat that can be ascertained sufficient for us to decide this dispute. That's how I understand their position. I think that's a really, really strange position to take when you're talking about a political system which is based almost entirely on the difference between Democrats and Republicans as a brand. I mean, that's like saying, you don't know the difference between Coke and Pepsi. Okay. I mean, Coke, it comes in like, the red can, and Pepsi comes in the blue can. And now sometimes they look a little different on the shelf, and you got to like look at it a little closer. But, it's something that we can probably come up with a definition for if we had a dispute that required us to decide between the difference between Coke and Pepsi. That's how I see it. So in this, so that's sort of, thinking about it as a legal matter. That's my first response. My second response is, as a political matter, everybody's been talking about the cigars comment about, wow, I can't believe the DNC actually said that in a court of law, that they could actually go back and smoke the cigars and pick the candidates that way. Because, how could you be on a unity tour and expect people to want to be in your party if that's the way you're telling them you're going to pick the candidates, or you feel like you could pick the candidates? Because let's be clear, if an organization feels they don't have a legal position or a legal obligation to do something, what are the chances they're actually going to do it, right? And so, that's my response to that. But getting back to your question, which gets to something even deeper here, which is that the Democrats want us to believe that there's no democratic identity. Yeah. Okay. And
at least they're going to have to argue that, right? They're going to have to argue that to get away with it.
But I'm looking forward to discovery on this issue if we get to this stage, because I want to sit, various people down and, confront them with all their talk about unity and what it means to be a Democrat, and what differentiates a Democrat from a Republican, and why we are different from them, so to speak. Because I would be really interested to hear how their answers jive with their legal arguments, and whether they'll continue to maintain those arguments in the face of what of what kind of evidence we may get in discovery, which is why, I really hope this gets to discovery because, if folks think this transcript is interesting, you haven't seen anything yet once you get to discovery. That's when the fun begins, so to speak.
Mike, if I could just echo that, the most valuable thing for a progressive movement would be to have the Democratic Party come in and argue that there's no real definition of a Democrat. And that it's simply based on registration. Like, I could see the court saying, okay, it's based on registration, but in a sense that would mean the Democratic Party is arguing, oh, there's really no such thing as a Democrat. It's just a self-identification kind of thing. And then on the flip side, to say what you just mentioned, Jared, that we can decide our party however we want to decide it. That, to me, to come full circle, despite every question that I asked you, that's worth having this entire trial in the first place, to get them on record on those two things.
Yes, we've already, we are barely, I just want to put this in perspective. Litigation is a very, very long process and it moves very, very deliberately. And given the political climate, given all the strong emotions that are swirling around right now, I think it's very natural that people want the process to go faster than it, than it typically does. And I want to say something on that because, I share in that anxiety. People that follow me on Twitter know how, emotional I can get about things.
Stay off Twitter, man. Stay off Twitter.
Yeah. I gotta, I'm gonna have to text you before I get on Twitter next time. Then
I'll tell you. Listen. You got a lot of people who won't tell you the truth. Right. I'm gonna tell you the truth, man. Do your lawyer thing because you're doing. Yeah, I think you're doing a good service, man.
I appreciate that, and you got to realize that until since 2008, 2007, I've been running a 3-person law firm with my wife. Okay. So, we do tend to go a little stir crazy sometimes because, this can feel like a lonely struggle. But what really keeps me focused in the task at hand is the public support and the enthusiasm and the comments from people just telling us to keep going. And the comments from, the really good questions from people about what the process is about, people learning about our legal system and, getting to the truth of how it works. Because I think there's been a lot of misinformation about that. That's been, part of our problem with our political system that's gone out there. People really don't know their rights and how to exercise them. So when I see that discussion happening, it kind of pulls me back in from the negativity. And I just feel the negativity is so thick. I mean, I can cut it with a knife right now, and, it pulls me in. So, I really, when we're able to have a positive discussion like this, that I feel, gets us going in a direction, whatever happens with this lawsuit, that just makes me feel really good.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, with that said, go ahead, Ben.
No, I actually have it, and it's. I'm not being. I maybe shouldn't even say this, Jared. I love the way your beard looks now. Update your profile page with your beard now. Your beard now is nice. I like it. I love the beard now.
That picture is from 2008. Okay, like. My beard now is like, I know it's a mess now. I got gray in my hair. I'm balding.
It's good. Use it.
My kids hate it. I know. Look, I got to come home. My 5-year-old and 3-year-old make fun of my beard. Thankfully my wife has learned not to make fun of the beard. But, it's a trigger for me. I'm not going to lie. Okay.
It's nice.
I'm guilty. And you know what? It's, we're not going to lose this case because, people don't like my beard or I'm sensitive about people. I can tell you that's not going to happen. Whatever's going to happen in this case, that's not going to happen. So anybody who's like concerned about that, that's okay. None of that matters in court. This judge is only going to be looking at arguments and evidence. He's not going to be looking at the Twitter accounts of any lawyers. On any issue that's material to the case. So, I am very motivated by this discussion to, let's say, just, turn more of a blind side to the negativity right now, because I see so much strength out there right now among not just progressives, but now we have people from all political spectrums actually looking at this case seriously. That feels like a good thing to me, because there's not a lot that feels good right now out there. Just everybody keep doing what you're doing in terms of, following the lawsuit, staying involved with our social media. It keeps us going.
Well, with that being said, I want to thank you, Jared, and thank you, Ben, for coming on the show and taking time out of your Friday nights to speak with us, about the lawsuit. I think it's really important. Do you guys have any last words before let everyone go?
French Connection, Jared. It's one part Cavassier, one part Grand Marnier. It'll relax you some, and you'll have a good evening tonight.
Well, I think Elizabeth and I might have 1 or 2 or 5 of those tonight.
No, just 2. Trust me. No other 2. That's all you need.
It's been a tough week, and I just want to wish everybody a good Memorial Day weekend. I've been thinking a lot about, my grandfather who fought in World War II and other veterans and families of veterans out there who made just enormous sacrifices for this country. So that's helps me put a lot in perspective, with things going on, that, people have faced forces a lot more terrifying in a lot of ways, and we've persevered. Maybe, I hope everybody gets some relaxation in, but, maybe give some time this weekend to think about those who paid the ultimate sacrifice so that we can have our freedoms.
This, Mike, definitely want to thank you and the Real Progressives for doing this.
Thanks for putting this together. Great discussion, guys.
Steve is live now for everyone watching, so switch on to that, and I'll be on with Los Angeles activist Lauren Steiner at 9 o'clock, probably a little bit later now. Because this ran a little bit late, and she's the host of Robust Opposition. We're going to talk about what happened last weekend with the California Democratic Party. So again, Jared, Ben, thank you very much. Everyone else, enjoy your weekend and check out our other live streams.
Okay. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate the discussion. This was great. Thanks for all your work on everything you guys do.
Hey, thanks a lot, man. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay.